A 9-year-old girl stood trembling at the hospital gates, cradling her newborn baby brother, while her sick mother swayed beside her. But instead of help, they were turned away, no insurance, no money, no mercy. Just when the night felt colder than ever, a soldier stopped. His golden retriever froze, then growled low. And in one bold move, the soldier stepped forward, lifted the mother in his arms, and said, "They're with me." What happened next shook the entire hospital to its core. Before we begin, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tap the bell so you won't miss the stories that will break and heal your heart all in one breath. Willow Creek, Montana, was a town that always seemed quieter in the cold. That night the air was crisp and still the kind of cold that settled into the bones and made even street lamps hum a little lower. No snow fell, but the sidewalks were damp and slick from the frost that had crept in hours earlier. The St. Grace Medical Center stood at the edge of the main road, its glass doors glowing under the orange haze of sodium lights, silent, spotless, untouched. Across the street near the edge of an old bus stop, 3 figures huddled in silence. Emily, just 9 years old, had the look of someone who'd learned too much too early. She was thin, almost fragile, with long, dark brown hair, tied with a makeshift ribbon, and hands chapped raw by the cold. In her arms, she held her baby brother Noah, swaddled in layers of thin blankets and flannel. His breath was faint against her collarbone. Beside them, slumped against the wall, was Sarah, their mother. At 31, she looked closer to 40. Her once strong frame had been whittled down by hardship and illness. Her sharp cheekbones now stood out too prominently, and her lips were pale and cracked. Sarah had once been a florist in a neighboring town, known for her warm smile and quiet wisdom. But years of poverty, single motherhood, and a recent bout of pneumonia had drained her of almost everything except her protective instincts. Sarah's breathing was shallow and slow. She said nothing, but one hand rested protectively on Emily's shoulder. Her eyes, bloodshot and half-lidded, stared at the hospital across the street. Emily glanced down at Noah. The baby made no sound, his body barely moving beneath the fabric. She leaned into Sarah, whispering, "Mama, we need to go in, please." Sarah shook her head weakly. "They'll ask questions. We don't have what they want." It wasn't money Sarah feared, it was rejection. She had heard too many stories of people like them being turned away. No insurance, no ID, no entry. And she couldn't bear to collapse in front of strangers one more time. From farther up the road, boots pressed steadily against pavement. Jack Carson. 37 walked with a soldier's rhythm, shoulders straight, gaze low, every step placed with purpose. His body carried the muscle of old battles, but his face showed fatigue, the kind that doesn't sleep away. He wore a utility jacket, thick denim jeans, and his military boots always laced, always clean. At his side walked Logan, a golden retriever just past 5 years old. His golden coat had darkened around the ears, and his gait had a subtle limp from an injury long healed but never forgotten. Logan had once trained in disaster zones, tracking survivors buried in rubble. He had a calmness about him, a patience that gave him presence. To children, he was a gentle protector. To Jack, he was family. They turned the corner near the hospital. Logan sniffed the air, then slowed. Jack noticed the shift instantly. "What's up, buddy?" Logan paused, his ears perked, his eyes locked toward the far side of the street. A second later, he tugged the leash, not hard, but purposeful. Jack followed his gaze. Across the quiet intersection, he spotted a small, bundled shape sitting near the base of a brick wall. Then he saw the woman leaning against it, his brow furrowed. Something wrong, he muttered more to himself than the dog. Logan tugged again, firmer now, his body rigid. Jack stopped walking. The moment stretched heavy and uncertain. He glanced across the empty street again, squinting. And then slowly he turned. Logan had already taken the lead. Jack Carson crossed the street like a man moving through fog, not rushed, but drawn by something deeper than instinct. Logan, his 5-year-old golden retriever, followed close behind, his honey-colored coat glinting faintly under the street lamps. The cold of the winter night wrapped around them both. But what Jack saw across the street chilled him more than the air ever could. A little girl no more than 9 sat hunched on the concrete, her arms wrapped tightly around a tiny bundle her baby brother he would soon learn. Beside her, a woman slumped against the building wall, her face flushed with fever, her limbs trembling. Something in Jack's chest stirred. Not pity, he'd grown up around enough of that to know it didn't help, but something heavier, older. responsibility. You folks all right? He asked gently, stopping a few feet away. The girl looked up, her brown eyes rimmed red. Her lower lip quivered, but she didn't answer. Jack noticed then how tightly she held the baby, how her small body was shielding his from the wind. The woman stirred beside her. "We're fine," she whispered hoarsely. "We'll move." Soon. Jack crouched. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emily." Her voice was like dry leaves scraping pavement. "This is Noah. He's my baby brother, and she's—" She glanced at the woman beside her. "My mom." Jack turned his eyes to the mother. Tall once, perhaps elegant, but now folded in on herself like a dying flame. Her face was pale, but her cheeks burned from fever. Sweat glistened at her brow. She was maybe 31, 32, but the weight of poverty and illness had aged her brutally. "Sarah," she added, her lips barely moving. "We're not looking for trouble." Jack stood. "You're not in trouble, but you need help." Sarah shook her head weakly. "We don't have insurance. We can't pay. They'll turn us away." Jack didn't answer. He glanced at Logan, who had slowly approached Sarah, tail-low posture, calm. The dog sniffed her hand gently, then gave it a small, deliberate lick just once, as if to say, "You're seen." Sarah blinked surprised. Then Logan turned and padded over to Emily, pressing his head softly against her knee. The girl froze at first, then slowly allowed herself to touch the soft fur at his neck. Jack took a breath, then knelt again. "Sarah, listen. I'm not asking for your paperwork. I'm telling you, come with me. You and your kids. Now." Sarah tried to protest, but when she looked up again, her resolve cracked. Her shoulders sagged. Jack reached out slowly, giving her a moment to object. When she didn't, he slid one arm beneath her knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her from the ground. She was frighteningly light. Emily jumped up. "Don't hurt her, I won't," Jack said calmly. "I promise." Emily clutched Noah tightly and followed as Jack turned. Logan walked alongside the girl, without being told his body close enough to touch. She glanced down at him, uncertain, but didn't pull away. They crossed the street together, one quiet procession, beneath flickering lights toward the glowing glass doors of St. Grace Medical Center. As they neared the entrance, the hospital lights spilled out across the sidewalk, sterile and cold but promising warmth inside. Emily hesitated at the threshold. Jack paused, waiting. Then Logan took one step forward and nudged her back gently. She blinked once, then stepped through the sliding doors. Inside the hospital buzzed with artificial light and the distant murmur of machines. Jack didn't break stride. Still holding Sarah in his arms, he led them toward the reception desk. And as the doors closed behind them, for the first time that night, the freezing wind stayed outside. The automatic doors of St. Grace Medical Center closed behind them with a mechanical hush. Inside the hospital lobby was bright cold and silent, except for the distant beeping of machines and the low murmur of a night shift TV. The sterile white lights reflected off the tile floor, casting long shadows beneath Jack Carson's boots as he carried Sarah toward the reception desk. Emily followed close behind, clutching Noah to her chest, and Logan walked silently beside her, ears perked, eyes alert. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 50s. His name tag read R.L. Stanton, head administrator. With slicked back graying hair and a stiff posture, he looked more like a banker than a medical worker. His jaw clenched as he spotted them approaching. Jack didn't wait for pleasantries. "She's burning up. This baby's freezing. They need help. Now." Stanton didn't blink. "Identification insurance?" "They don't have it," Jack replied evenly. Stanton's voice turned glacial. "Then they can't be admitted. Hospital policy." Emily's face paled. Sarah stirred weakly in Jack's arms, barely conscious. "Please," Emily whispered. "My mom, she's sick. Please." Stanton crossed his arms. "This is not a shelter. We are not authorized to take walk-ins without documentation. No ID, no insurance, no admittance." Jack took a slow breath. His voice dropped tight with controlled fury. "You're telling me you'll let a mother and 2 kids die on the lobby floor because of a form?" From the far end of the desk, a young woman in scrubs shifted nervously, barely 23 with red hair tied into a messy ponytail, and freckles scattered across her cheeks. She wore a badge that read, Amber, Medical Intern. Her eyes darted between Jack and Stanton. Quietly, she pulled out her phone, slipped behind a divider, and started recording. Jack leaned forward, still holding Sarah. I'll cover their care. My name's Jack Carson. Run it through me. Stanton's lips curled into a grim line. That's not how it works. Then tell me how it does, Jack snapped. Because all I see is a sick woman who won't make it to sunrise unless someone grows a spine. A nearby security guard approached slowly. He was a thick-set man in his 40s, bald with a heavy mustache. His name patch read, Ed. He didn't speak, just stood close enough to make his presence known. Emily clutched Noah tighter, her small arms shaking. I don't want my mom to die, she said again, barely audible, but the words cut deeper than any threat. The moment froze. Even Logan, standing alert beside the girl, let out a soft, guttural whimper. Then from a corridor beyond the front desk, a new voice broke through. Calm, grounded, familiar. Jack Carson. They turned to see a tall, lean man in his early 60s dressed in a white coat. His salt and pepper hair was combed back neatly, and he wore thin wireframe glasses. His embroidered coat read, Dr. A. Willis, ER Chief. Jack blinked in disbelief. Willis! The doctor nodded once. You saved my son's leg, Fallujah, 2007. You don't forget that kind of thing. He stepped forward and gently touched Sarah's forehead. Fever spiking, lungs sound rough. The baby Emily hesitated, then lifted Noah for the doctor to inspect. His face darkened. They're coming with me, he said firmly. Stanton stepped forward. Dr. Willis, we can't admit I said. Willis interrupted without raising his voice. They're coming with me. I'll take full responsibility. Any forms can wait. He turned to the nurse, passing by, a broad-shouldered woman with short braids and sharp eyes. Get triage ready, room 2. Oxygen and warm IV fluids. Page Nurse Bennett. The nurse nodded and disappeared down the corridor. Jack looked at Willis, stunned. Thank you. Willis offered a tight smile, still paying off debts. He turned to Emily and gestured. Come on, sweetheart. You too. The group moved down the hallway, the tension of the lobby retreating behind them. Logan padded beside Emily without a sound. Sarah remained limp in Jack's arms, her breathing shallow but still present. Meanwhile, behind the desk, Amber stopped recording and stared at her screen. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but purpose. The video was already titled, Veteran Turned Away While Carrying Dying Woman and Kids. What this hospital did next. She pressed upload. In the silence that followed, Stanton straightened his coat, unaware that before the night ended, that video would cross 50,000 views, and by dawn, St. Grace would be a household name. The hallway outside the emergency ward hummed with sterile light. The air felt still thick with exhaustion and fluorescent buzz. Sarah had been wheeled through the double doors nearly 10 minutes ago, and every second since felt like a year to Emily. She sat on a hard plastic bench, her back straight, arms tight around baby Noah. The 2-month-old was warm in her lap, swaddled in the threadbare blanket. His breaths were slow, peaceful. Emily wasn't. Her eyes kept drifting to the doors, willing them to open. Jack stood nearby, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His frame, broad but lean, cast a quiet shadow across the floor. He looked 37, but tonight the lines on his face made him older. The sleeves of his olive military jacket were worn thin. His eyes were locked on nothing, as if wrestling with ghosts only he could see. She'll be okay. Right. Emily's voice was small, trembling. Jack turned his head, slightly studying her. They're helping her now. That's what matters. Emily nodded faintly. Her tangled chestnut hair fell over her cheek, sticking to the dried salt of tears. She pulled Noah closer. Jack walked over and sat down beside her. What's his name, Noah? Strong name? He gets cold easy, she said. I tried to keep him warm. You did good. Jack looked down at the infant. You did better than most grown-ups would have. Emily said nothing, but Logan, lying on the floor beside her feet, gently lifted his head and nuzzled her knee. She reached down and stroked his fur with trembling fingers. Jack hesitated. You know, I had a sister once. Emily looked up. Her name was Ellie, he continued. She died when she was 10. Pneumonia. My folks didn't have insurance. They sent her home with some cough syrup and hope. Emily stared. She died because of that, Jack nodded. They didn't say it that way, but yeah, they just watched her get worse. Silence wrapped around them for a few moments. Then Jack added quietly, "I guess I promised myself I'd never let that happen to someone else." Emily looked down at Noah again, her thumb brushing his cheek. Her voice was a whisper. "I don't want my mom to die." Jack didn't answer. Instead, he placed a steady hand on her shoulder. His grip was firm, not forceful, just enough to remind her someone was there. Logan shifted closer, resting his head beside Noah's bundled feet. Across town, in a dimly lit office at the Redwood Gazette, a woman in her 30s sat before a glowing laptop screen. Grace O'Donnell, a local journalist known for her sharp wit and sharper headlines, was hunched forward reading the footage she had received through a tip. A few short clips. Low quality. A man in a military jacket arguing with hospital security. A little girl clutching a baby. A golden retriever by her side. Grace had straight auburn hair and thin glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She wore a faded sweater sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her fingers paused over the keyboard as she hovered over the title bar. Soldier and Dog Rescue Abandoned Mother Hospital Refuses Treatment. She thought for a second, then added, Public Outrage Mounts. The clock ticked. She clicked publish. Back in the hospital, Logan suddenly lifted his head. His ears pricked up. Jack noticed immediately 5 years of relying on that dog's instincts made him trust every signal. Footsteps echoed from down the corridor. A woman approached in white scrubs holding a clipboard against her chest. Her name tag read, Elise Raymond, RN. She looked about 40 with fair skin, short sandy blonde hair, and a tired but gentle expression. Her pale blue eyes scanned Emily before settling on Jack. "You're Jack Carson?" "Yes. Sarah is stable," Elise said. "She's on oxygen and IV antibiotics. We've got her in observation. She'll rest for a few hours, but things are looking much better than when she came in." Emily let out a breath like a balloon deflating. Her knees buckled and Jack reached out quickly to steady her. "She's really okay?" Emily asked. Elise smiled faintly. "She is. You got her here in time?" Jack nodded his thanks. Elise offered a sympathetic nod before disappearing down the hall. At the front desk near the hospital entrance, chaos was beginning to stir. Paul Kinsey, the hospital's PR officer, a white man in his mid-40s with slick hair and a suit too expensive for the hour, stood frozen in front of the receptionist's monitor. On screen was a social media dashboard. "We're trending," the receptionist said quietly. "The hashtag's already hit 200,000 views in under an hour." Kinsey squinted at the screen. "Let them in. Logan, the hero. Estigre scandal." Phones rang. Email alerts buzzed. A second monitor lit up with local news notifications. One anchor was already calling for a public response. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, a small crowd had started to form. Not protesters, not yet. Mostly curious onlookers holding phones recording quietly. Among them, a middle-aged man with a news camera wearing a parka with a station logo. Another, a college student live streaming to her TikTok followers. Inside, Jack sat again. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, no longer crying. Noah let out a soft hiccup and curled tighter into her arms. Logan, ever patient, remained at her feet, one paw pressed gently against her boot. Jack looked down the corridor where Sarah had vanished, and then up at the monitors flashing headlines from beyond the walls. Something had begun, and this time he wasn't walking away. The following morning broke cold and gray, but inside room 207 of St. Grace Hospital, the heaviness of night had begun to lift. The sterile white walls were softened by the warm hum of a heart monitor and the quiet rustle of sheets. Sarah, pale but conscious, blinked awake beneath the fluorescent lights. Her chest ached and her lips were dry, but she was alive and not alone. Across the room, Emily sat curled in a chair, her arms wrapped protectively around baby Noah, who stirred softly in his sleep. Her eyes were fixed on her mother with a mix of caution and hope. When Sarah groaned faintly and shifted, Emily sprang up. "Mom!" Her voice cracked. Sarah's gaze found her daughter. Illy! Her voice was hoarse, broken. Emily nodded, tears already brimming. "You're okay. You're really okay." Sarah tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed her back down. Her face was still flushed from the fever, but her thin features were softer now, no longer twisted by pain. She was 36, but had the exhausted frame of someone 10 years older, gaunt cheeks, dull brown hair pulled back in a hospital braid and calloused hands that trembled when she reached out. Emily held her hand tightly. "You passed out. Outside the hospital. I didn't know what to do, but someone came. A man and his dog. They brought us inside." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. For months she had fought to hide her illness-rationed food, keep Noah warm and shield Emily from the collapse of their world. The shame of needing help had eaten away at her pride until nothing was left but the instinct to survive. Now, a stranger's kindness had broken that last wall. "You saved me," Sarah whispered. "You and that dog." Meanwhile, in the administrative wing of the hospital, tensions were unraveling. The board of directors had convened an emergency meeting. Behind closed doors, the air was thick with frustration and embarrassment. Dr. Leonard Hale, the hospital's director, a man in his early 60s, tall with thinning white hair and steel-gray eyes, stood at the head of the conference table. Known for his rigid adherence to protocol, Hale now found himself at the center of a storm he hadn't foreseen. He tapped a printed tweet with his knuckle. "This has gone national." Tanya Brooks, the hospital's legal counsel, barely 30, blonde, with round glasses and a clipped tone, adjusted her blazer. "We've reviewed the footage and testimonies. The security staff violated the hospital's emergency access policies. The intake nurse failed to follow compassionate care protocol. We're exposed, publicly or legally?" Hale asked. "Both." The vote was swift. 2 staff members were suspended. A third head of intake was dismissed entirely. Official statements were drafted, but even Hale knew damage control would only go so far. Back in the patient wing, Jack stood just outside Sarah's room. He hadn't entered. Something in him hesitated, perhaps fear of intruding on a family's sacred reunion, or perhaps the ghosts of his own losses whispering again. Logan sat beside him, tail lightly sweeping the floor. The 5-year-old golden retriever had been by Jack's side through deployment's recovery, and now this strange night in a civilian hospital. His coat gleamed under the corridor lights, his eyes alert but calm. Emily emerged quietly. "She's awake." Jack nodded. "I'll let her rest." Emily hesitated, then reached into her pocket. I made this." She pulled out a small folded paper, then knelt beside Logan and slipped it into the loop of his collar. It was tied with a purple ribbon. Jack raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A letter," Emily said, smiling shyly. "For Logan. It says, 'Thank you,' and that I think he's a guardian, like a gatekeeper who never sleeps." Jack was quiet for a moment. His eyes softened. "He's more than a dog," Emily added. Jack looked down at Logan, at the scar along his front leg, from a mission in Kandahar, at the gentle eyes that had watched over more than just battlefield brothers. In that moment, Jack saw not a tool, not a soldier, but a companion, a soul. "Yeah," he said softly, "he is." As the day wore on, Sarah regained more strength. She spoke with a hospital social worker who helped set up temporary Medicaid while arranging for a longer observation stay. Emily never left her mother's side except to get water or rock Noah. Across town, the video of Jack's confrontation continued to ripple. News outlets ran with the story of the soldier and the silent dog. Comment sections buzzed with outrage, admiration, and suspicion in equal measure. Protesters gathered outside the hospital with signs. But inside room 207, the noise was distant, muffled. Sarah cupped Emily's face, her voice still raspy but filled with awe. "You did everything right, sweetheart. And that man, he didn't have to stop." Emily smiled. "He didn't ask questions. He just helped." Sarah nodded slowly. "That kind of person is rare." Outside the room, Jack stood watch Logan at his side, the little purple ribbon fluttering gently from the dog's collar. The guardian had done his job. And somewhere for the first time in months, Sarah closed her eyes, not in fear, but in peace. The small wooden cabin stood at the edge of a narrow road, framed by tall cedar trees, its roof weathered by years of Pacific wind and rain. A slanted porch creaked under Jack's boots as he opened the door for Sarah and the children. It wasn't much, just 3 rooms and a fireplace, but to Sarah, it looked like a castle. Jack carried Noah in his arms. Emily held her mother's hand as they stepped inside. The warmth from a small iron stove wrapped around them, filling the room with the scent of burning pine. Sarah paused in the doorway, letting the silence of the place settle over her. Sarah was still pale, her skin fragile like tissue, but color had begun to return to her lips. In the daylight, her gaunt features seemed softer. She was 36 with thin brown hair pulled into a loose knot, eyes that once sparkled now dulled by months of hunger and fear. Her gait was slow, careful, still recovering, but there was something in her posture that had shifted, a subtle strength that had returned. Jack guided them to the small living room. "There's a bedroom through there," he said quietly, gesturing to the right. "You can rest. Emily, I set up a cot for you next to your mom." Emily looked up, clutching her little brother. "It's warm here." Jack smiled faintly. That stove took some convincing. Sarah managed a tired laugh. It was the first sound from her that wasn't pain or apology. Later that evening, as twilight settled outside and the forest turned to shadows, Logan lay down in front of Sarah's bedroom door. His golden fur shimmered in the firelight. He was 5 years old, still strong, but calmer than most dogs his age. His eyes followed Sarah every time she moved. That night, like every night since the hospital, he refused to sleep elsewhere. "Is he always like that?" Sarah asked Jack as they stood in the kitchen. Jack rinsed a pot under lukewarm water. "Depends. He used to sleep beside me, but after Kandahar, he changed. He listens harder, watches longer. I think he's always waiting for something." Sarah nodded. "Or someone." Jack glanced at her. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The flickering light made her look younger. Or maybe it just peeled away some of the fatigue. "Why did you help us?" she asked softly. Jack dried his hands on a towel. "Because no one helped my sister." Sarah said nothing, but her eyes locked on his. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. In that silence, the pain passed between them, like a tide. Emily peeked out from the hallway. "Can we have tea?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Do 9-year-olds drink tea?" Emily grinned for the first time. "Hospital tea is gross. Maybe yours is better." Sarah looked at her daughter in shock, tears almost forming. It had been nearly 2 years since Emily had smiled without being forced. Jack motioned toward the kettle. "We'll test the theory." They gathered near the fireplace, Logan lying across their feet like a warm rug. Jack handed Sarah a mug. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. The heat soothed her fingers. Emily leaned against her shoulder, cradling Noah, who was bundled in a clean blue blanket Jack had found in a box of military gear. "This is the first time I've felt safe in... I don't know how long," Sarah whispered. Jack didn't look at her, just stared into the flames. "Safety is quiet. Most people don't notice it until it's gone." The night deepened. The wind tapped the windows gently, but inside the cabin the air stayed calm. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, Jack sat alone on the porch steps, Logan beside him. The stars overhead glittered between the pine branches. Jack sipped coffee from a chipped enamel cup. Logan stirred, his ears twitching. Jack scratched behind the dog's neck. "You picked them," he murmured. "I just followed." Inside, Sarah lay awake. She watched Emily breathing beside her, Noah nestled between them. Her thoughts drifted to the cold sidewalk outside the hospital, to the fear she'd felt when Jack had approached. Now that same man was giving them firelight and tea. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight the door had stayed open. The rain had returned that evening, not a storm, but a persistent whispering drizzle that clung to the windows of Jack's old cabin, like a memory that refused to let go. Inside, the hearth glowed low with amber light. Logan lay curled beside it, his tail gently thumping whenever someone passed. Emily, in a flannel nightgown too large for her, was building towers from wooden blocks, while Sarah quietly rocked Noah, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the creaks of the old rocking chair. Jack stood by the window watching the mist roll in through the pines, the kind of fog that swallowed sound and time. He felt it in his bones, something coming. A knock shattered the quiet. Logan lifted his head first, ears stiff. Jack walked to the door, caution tensing his shoulders. When he opened it, the cold drifted in like a ghost. Standing there was a man tall, perhaps early 40s, with thinning blonde hair slicked back with rain and a stiff jaw shaded with 5-day stubble. His leather jacket was soaked, his boots muddy. His blue eyes were not filled with concern, but calculation. "Sarah," he said flatly, "we need to talk." Inside, Sarah froze. She instinctively clutched Noah, close, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Thomas," she whispered. "Thomas Redford. He hadn't been seen in 3 years, not since the night he walked out after a bitter argument, leaving Sarah pregnant and Emily without a goodbye. No money, no messages, just absence. Jack stepped between them. "You shouldn't be here," Thomas scoffed. "And you are someone who didn't run when things got hard." Thomas shifted his gaze, locking eyes with the little girl, peeking from behind a doorframe. "Emily," he said softer now, but it landed wrong like a stranger reading from a script. Sarah's voice returned sharp and full of fury. "You don't get to say her name. I'm her father. You stopped being that the day you left." Thomas's expression hardened. "I'm filing for custody." The door slammed shut in his face. Later that night, the cabin was quiet again, but the tension lingered like the fog outside. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her thin fingers trembling over legal documents Jack had found, through an old Army friend now working pro bono. Jack leaned on the counter, his military green hoodie pulled tight against the draft. "He can't win," he said firmly. "Judges don't like ghosts trying to play house." Sarah sighed. "He has money and a clean face. He also has abandonment on record, no contact, no support. And you've got this house," Emily's words, "and a golden retriever who's practically a therapist." A weak laugh escaped her. "You think Logan could testify?" Jack smiled. "Might be our best witness." Upstairs, Emily thrashed in her sleep. Her quiet cries broke through the cabin's thin walls. Logan stood up, immediately trotted to the staircase, and scratched gently at her door. Jack opened it. Inside, Emily sat upright, shaking. Her arms reached out wordlessly. Logan jumped onto the bed, curled around her protectively. She buried her face in his golden fur. Sarah stood by the doorway, watching the scene unfold in silence. Jack's eyes met hers. "She still dreams about him," Sarah whispered. "Even after all this time." The next day brought another knock at the door, this one gentler. A woman stood outside, mid-30s, short chestnut curls under a canvas hat, a messenger bag slung across her shoulder. "Laura Brenner, reporter for the Ashland Daily Chronicle?" "I'm not here to dig dirt," she said quickly. "I read about what happened online. I want to tell the truth." Sarah hesitated, but Jack nodded. They let her in. Laura's questions were respectful. She scribbled notes furiously, her green eyes sharp behind wire-frame glasses. She took pictures of Logan lying beside Emily of the cabin of the fireplace. 2 days later, her article appeared on the Chronicle's front page, "Left behind, but not alone. A soldier's promise, a mother's fight." It went viral within hours. Messages poured in, donations, letters of support, even an offer of free legal assistance from a family law firm in Portland. The hospital issued a public apology. And Thomas. He went silent. The custody hearing was set for the end of the week. In the courtroom, Sarah stood tall in a borrowed dress. Her hair was brushed, her posture proud. Jack wore his old Marine dress blues, clean and creased. Logan sat at his heel, calm, his eyes scanning every corner like a sentry. Across the aisle, Thomas appeared nervous. His lawyer spoke fast, but hollow. The judge, Helen Whitmore, a silver-haired woman in her 60s with the air of someone who had no patience for nonsense, listened quietly. She asked Sarah only one question. "Do you love your children?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "With everything I have left." Then she turned to Emily. The little girl sat stiffly in her seat, her legs swinging above the ground. "Emily, who do you want to live with?" Emily's voice barely carried. "Not him." It was done. Sarah was granted full custody. Thomas left without a word. Back at the cabin, Sarah collapsed into Jack's arms in the kitchen, sobbing not from grief, but from release. Logan lay beside Emily once more that night, head on her lap. And Sarah stood at the stairs looking at Jack. He was repairing the door Thomas had banged so hard. He had stayed. The pine trees stood taller that spring, their green deepened by the gentle rains of Ashland. A warm wind fluttered the curtains in the old wooden cabin, now newly stained and mended, no longer a place of refuge, but one of beginnings. The roof had been fixed. The garden, once wild, now held neat rows of tomatoes, lavender, and wild daisies. And on the gate, a hand-painted sign hung beneath a brass lantern. "Here, the door is never locked." Jack Carson, now 39, stood on the porch in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and faded jeans dusted with sawdust. His once cropped hair had grown longer, brushing the tops of his ears, and though the lines at the corners of his eyes had deepened, There was a lightness in them that hadn't been there a year ago. Beside him lay Logan, now 6 years old. His once glossy golden fur had begun to pale around the muzzle, and he moved slower than before, but his eyes held the same quiet wisdom. Every afternoon he still claimed the porch as his lookout post, his tail thumping when Emily returned from school, or when baby Noah giggled in the yard. Inside the home buzzed with the kind of noise that had once seemed unreachable: laughter, soft footsteps, the rattle of silverware, a lullaby hummed in the kitchen. Sarah, now 35, moved with a quiet grace. Her tall, slender frame wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and her auburn hair, once brittle with stress, now shone again with copper warmth. The hollows beneath her eyes had softened, and the tightness in her voice had melted into calm. She poured tea into mismatched mugs, humming an old tune as Emily scribbled nearby on the wooden floor. Emily, 10, now had blossomed into a bright, observant girl. She had her mother's eyes wide and green, and a habit of tapping her pencil against her lip when deep in thought. Today she was coloring with fierce, focused tongue, poking out slightly as she outlined Logan in a field of daisies. Next to him was a tall man with broad shoulders, Jack, and a smiling woman with a baby on her hip. Noah, now walking unsteadily on toddler legs, waddled across the floor in a dinosaur onesie. He fell on his bottom with a squeal of laughter. Logan's ears perked up, but he didn't move from his sunny spot, just wagged his tail once in approval. That morning, they'd gone to the courthouse. Jack, with trembling hands, had handed over a manila envelope with papers he'd spent months preparing. Sarah had been quiet the whole ride there, fingers laced tightly in her lap, only glancing at Jack when she thought he wasn't looking. The judge had been a short, no-nonsense woman with gray hair and a soft voice. After reading the petition, she'd asked one question. "Mr. Carson, why do you want to adopt Sarah's children?" Jack looked at Emily, then at Noah in Sarah's lap, then finally at Logan, who had been allowed to sit in the back of the courtroom thanks to his prior service as a K-9. "Because I'm already theirs," he said. The judge nodded. "So be it." Now at home, Sarah placed a hand on Jack's arm. "It's official," she said. "You're stuck with us." He smiled. Was hoping for that. Emily interrupted them with a triumphant shout. "Done." She held up her drawing, Logan in the front yard, Jack hammering a fence post, Sarah holding baby Noah with the sun shining behind her, and above them on the little gate drawn in brown crayon was a sign that read, "Here the door is never locked." Jack knelt to her level. "That's beautiful, Em," she beamed. "I want to hang it on the fridge forever." Later that night, when Noah was tucked in and Sarah was folding laundry on the porch, Emily crawled into Logan's side, resting her cheek against his soft fur. The old dog didn't move, just sighed content. Jack stepped out and leaned against the porch column, watching them. Sarah joined him quietly. "She told me something this morning," Sarah said. "On the way to court." "What was it?" She said, "Now I never have to cry outside a hospital again." Jack didn't answer. He reached over and gently wrapped an arm around Sarah's shoulders. The wind passed through the trees like a song. The stars blinked on above them. In the hush of that evening, with no alarms, no threats, no waiting rooms or locked doors, the world finally exhaled. Inside the house, the drawing fluttered on the fridge, held by a magnet shaped like a golden paw. Sometimes the miracles we pray for don't come with thunder or lightning. They arrive in the form of a tired soldier, a golden-hearted dog, or the quiet courage of a little girl holding her brother beneath the cold night sky. In a world where doors are often closed to those who need them, this story reminds us love opens the gate. It is no coincidence that Jack walked by that night. It is no coincidence that Logan stopped. When the world turned away, Grace stepped in softly but powerfully. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was God's way of showing that He still works through people and paws through whispered prayers and trembling hands. Let this story be your reminder that hope is never lost, that even in your darkest hour, someone might still say, "Come with me." Someone might still carry you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists. Leave a comment and type "Amen" if you believe that miracles still happen. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that shine light in the dark. May God bless you and everyone you love.